So we're going to paint a sunflower painting today, and the first thing we do is get our base coat on there. And we made this base coat very thick. It's kind of medium thick, like a thick house paint. And it kind of finishes out as like a satiny finish. But the good thing about it is it has a lot of opacity, and you can put it on your panel and pretty much get coverage in one coat. Sometimes you got to go over and get a little touch up in it. But I put it on there kind of liberally because I like to see the brush stroke on there, and you can see how you can see those lines in the brush stroke. And to me, that's the way I like to paint, because it shows that, it's really painted by a human, and it's not perfect. And of course, you can go in and try and get it perfectly smooth. And if you wanted to do that, you would just put less paint on there and do it in 2 or 3 coats. But I designed this paint to go on there kind of thick like that. And it's kind of reminiscent of the style that I like to paint. And on these wood panels, I like to paint over the sides too, because it gives a nice uniformity. You don't have to frame these, and you can hang them right on the wall. So make sure you get all the sides covered. Just kind of continue to go all the way around the wood panel, pick it up and make sure it's all covered. I'm going to go over around the panel and just make sure I've got all the paint covered on there, and I think we're going to be pretty much ready to go to start the texture. You can go wet on wet, or you can wait about 15-20 minutes for it to thoroughly dry on top, or just partially dry at least. But we're going to begin working with the texture. And I like working with these bags because I get to control the paint really well. So you're just going to basically cut off the tip about 1 inch, 3/4 of an inch wide, put a nice dollop on the panel. And so this first portion is actually going to be for the petals of the sunflower. And I put about maybe a little less than 1/4 or 1/3 of the paint onto the cardboard palette. And I'm going to grab some of the Hansa Yellow and just start blending it in there. And I'm not going to get it completely dark yellow because I'm going to accent it with the actual straight yellow. I'm just going to get it nice and tinted. I'm going to get it fairly mixed. I'm not going to get it like 100% thoroughly mixed. And you can see the paint here I'm putting on the side. I'm going to put some of that onto the sunflower each time I make a stroke. And this part's really important here. I'm going to put a little bit of red in there. And I'm just going to tint that yellow with a slight orangey tone into there. So you can see just a tiny bit. You can, if you go overboard, it's going to get too red. And this way we'll have a nice contrast of the paint that we actually put onto the palette knife. And so you can see here I'm just mixing a little at a time, because if you go too far, it's going to be really deep orange and the color will be off. And this way we have 3 contrasted colors. You can see the pile of texture there that has some white and yellow, light yellow. And now we've made like a nice deep warm yellow. And that yellow we're creating on the right side of the palette is going to be what we're going to tone each stroke with, as I just mentioned. So I'm going to keep thoroughly mixing that so that red does not bleed into the palette strokes. So I'm going to grab a little bit more Hansa Yellow, and so we got all of our palette ready to go to start working on the sunflower petals. And the key here is, we're going to work on some palette knife strokes here. We're just going to kind of play with on the paint on the palette before we actually go on the painting. And it's really important. You can see here this roll, you want to get the paint just perfectly onto the palette knife before you apply it to the wood panel. And you can see that roll. And I'm going to practice on the wood panel and practice those sunflower strokes. And I'm not pushing the knife all the way down to the bottom. I'm kind of just hovering over the top and sliding it and dragging it back. That way it gets that nice deep petal shape without getting smeared onto the wood panel. So don't push all the way down, but practice as much as you need to on the wood panel before you start applying it to practice as much on your palette before the wood panel so you can get that stroke right. Just stop the video and just keep practicing, because once you master that stroke, you can keep going kind of with less effort, and it kind of flows really good, and you built that muscle memory, kind of like people do in golf swings. And I'm kind of just laying out here where I'm going to put like 3 sunflowers. I'm going to put one in the upper left, one in the middle, and one there to the middle right. And so now that I have that kind of laid out and I practice the stroke, I'm going to go ahead and start putting the petals onto the panel. And you can see each time I'm rolling that knife and I'm getting a perfect petal. Make sure you get that right before you start going onto the wood panel on your palette. Practice a lot. And I'm just kind of pulling them all towards the center, kind of imagining there's a nice circle in the center. When it gets to a point, if you cannot kind of work upside down like I am there with the hand, turn the panel all the way around, because you'll find a point where it's comfortable to put that stroke in. I'm used to it. I've been doing it a long time, so it's not a big deal. So that's that point right there. If you need to, keep turning the panel around until it's comfortable for you to do it, because that upside down stroke is a little bit awkward, you know. So I've created a full circle now of petals, and I'm going to do a second layer of petals going into there, so it has a little bit of depth to it. And so I'm going to go in between each set of petals and put another stroke. These strokes are a little smaller than the first strokes I put down, and I'm going to do that all the way around right now. And just kind of keep that flow going. Make sure that paint is nice and rounded. I'm moving pretty fast, but you can slow down and just keep making sure that you get that paint rolled onto that knife. Make sure it's smooth on the knife, because the smoother it is on the knife, the smoother it's going to be, and you're going to have that nice shape onto your wood panel. And I'm just going to keep this repetitive pattern for all 3 flowers until I complete all 3 of the yellow flower petals. And so again, I'm pulling a little bit of the darker yellow in. It's kind of harder to tell in the video, but it has a nice variegated tone between multiple shades of yellow and a little bit of white, and it just glows a little bit like that. And again, I keep piling it up in the center, because as it piles up in the center, you have more room to get that nice roll. And so I had to add a little bit more paint because I didn't put out enough. You know, be conservative in the beginning so you have enough for all the other parts of the painting. So if you put all the yellow in first, you know, then you don't have enough for everything else, even though we're going to use yellow to make the green. But it's good to kind of calculate how much. And so it's about 1/3 of the paint that we're going to be using, maybe a little bit more than 1/3 for the flower petals. So basically I needed to add a little extra yellow for that 3rd flower. And you can see here I like to go off the wood paint a little bit. I'm going to continue on with this 3rd flower, and I'm going to make sure I work my strokes in between the other flowers. You can see how that petal just went in between the other 2 petals. Doesn't have to be that way, but I like kind of strategically to place those. And then we're about to come in here on this side and put these last petals over the side, so just be very methodical, and so they don't get too awkward going over the edge there. But it's always nice to show that texture hanging off the edge there. Now I'm going to continue back in and just fill in those centers in between in that second layer of flower petals going in there, scraping up into the pile the last bit of yellow I have in there. You can see there I forgot a few petals on the second flower I did, but just going to go in and keep filling them all in. So just keep scraping that yellow paint, just using it up there, getting those last center petals in between the others. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the center of the flower. And the center of the flower is like where the sunflower seeds. And we're going to work out of the bag, and we're going to pipe the center just directly into these nice spiraled centers, kind of, you know, about 3/4 of an inch high, and spiraling out there with those. And we're going to use our knife to actually work the seeds in there with some black paint. We're going to take a little bit of black, clean the knife off, and put some black on the palette. It's not going to take a whole lot here. We're going to mix a little bit of black down there. We're going to probably tone it down a little bit with some of the yellow in there, and just a hair of red to give it a nice warm tone. You know, it just slightly warms it up. It's not necessary. And this part right here, again, when you're adding these tones of colors, is just do a little bit at a time, because you can really go too far, and then you're going to have this weird orangey black that's going to look awkward. But I just basically warming up that black just a tiny bit. And so what we're going to do here, we're going to just kind of like take the tip of the knife with a little bit of black, and we're just going to draw up those seeds. It's like we're pulling them up into the center. And when we pull up, we're just kind of making that seed shape. And this is kind of an impression of a seed. I'm not making a perfect seed. In actuality, none of this stuff is made to be organically correct. It's just all impressionistic. But it's going to definitely look like, you know, black and white sunflower seeds. So occasionally, as you get too much of the other paint in there, the yellow mixed in there, you got to keep cleaning that knife off. So you have a nice clean knife, and just get it. When we put the black in, we're just using a little bit on the bottom of the knife each time. And so we're going to go back and start working the seeds again, pulling them straight up. You can see there just a little bit of black on there. And I'm pulling them up. And right now I'm getting into the edge and kind of drawing in from the yellow part of the petals. So it all kind of has a nice homogeneous feel. And you can see there how the yellow pulled in a little bit. And kind of have a little bit more natural feel. And I'm basically going to do all 3 tops right now. You can see here I'm just going each flower at a time. And just pulling those seeds up. This is a pretty simple process right here, doing the seed part. It's kind of fun just, you know, seeing how they come to life with these basic strokes. But I'm working my way from the center outward and keep spiraling around the flower. And at some point you're going to have to stop and just realize you go too far out, and that's your discretion how far out you want to go. In reality, a lot of times sunflowers is more center than there are petals. You know, these probably could go out a little bit more, but for some reason I've always stopped around that point. These are, like I said, not organically correct, but you know, you can paint them as organically correct as you want. This is like a nice impression of a sunflower. So I'm going to continue on here with the seeds, pulling out from the inside out, and just keep spiraling around. And you can see there how that last little bit, when I start pulling yellow in, that's usually when my last circle around there. So now I'm going to start preparing for the foliage part, the green stems and leaves. Pushing this black aside, we're actually going to use some black and mix it with yellow to make a green. And we're going to use the Hansa Yellow directly out of the jar to mix with the black before we mix the white in there, so we know the true tone of green we want to get. And it's really interesting how that black, but you just do a little bit at a time, you're going to have this gray mud, but you can see it's going to start to turn green. And get the green foundation ready to go with the mid viscosity Hansa Yellow to get that green just the way you want it. And I just keep mixing it. Whenever you bring the black in, just bring in a little at a time, because it could overpower it. And so now that I have my green ready, I'm going to, you know, mix a little bit in with the white, and I'm not going to thoroughly mix it all the way, so I have a nice multi-tone feel to it. But again, be careful of that black, you know, in coming out too gray looking. If you feel that you get too, you know, gray looking, just keep adding more Hansa Yellow if needed, if there's some still left in the jar. And get all that black off the knife before you start. It's really important to keep the knife clean, you know, when you want to get the exact color you want and not intrude by whatever you were mixing. So this nice earthy green right there mixed into the texture. I'm keeping a pile of the green that I mixed there to the left, so I can use that to put on the knife as we go on to the actual sunflower. So I'm just still continuing to build my foundation foliage color. In the video it looks a little bit more yellow, but you're going to see more green in there when you in real person. So I've got my green down there. I'm going to get just a little bit on the knife, and everything is worked on the bottom of the knife. And I'm planning out my stems there. You can see here, planning that out before I go. And I just draw, I'm going to go up into the sunflower and draw it in, and just draw it straight down. And once I get the stems in, you can see there, you know, I'm creating a path that has kind of some balance and symmetry to it. And then once I get, and pretty much trying to get that in one stroke too. And each time I'm trying to pull a little bit of that deeper green in there. And then I'm going to make a leaf, and almost the same as I'm making the flower petals, but I'm pushing a little harder for it to spread out a little bit wider and fatter. I'm just creating this leaf pattern coming down the stems. Just blending the deeper green in with the lighter green. I'm just going to keep working each stem and each petal as I go down, and I'm finding just openings and spaces where it makes sense to pop them in without overcrowding the wood panel with the leaves. And so keeping that pile, again, always is important to keep that pile tight and high so you can get that nice roll on the knife. And I'm going to cut in. You can see how I just cut in there in that space in between the two sunflowers. You know, you don't really know until you get there, and you just kind of find the best place that you're going to open it into there. And as you can see, it went right into the sunflower itself. And that's what's nice about painting wet on wet, so they blend in together kind of seamlessly. And so I'm just kind of finishing out that leaf pattern there. Just scraping up the last little bit here for the last leaf going in. So right now what I'm doing is I'm trying to get a little bit of darker contrast for the flower stems that are going to come in to bring in the red tones. I always like to bring in a contrasting color, and imagine there's like wildflowers in with the sunflowers. And you can see I have a little pile of red there. And I like to just do this really to just have a nice contrast of color. And when I was beginning painting flowers when I was younger, well, 20 years ago, I guess it was, it's like one day I was like, I needed some color in there. So I was like, okay, so I'm going to pop this red in there. So right now as I'm using this pastry bag, and I made a darker green, because it's going to contrast better with the lighter green. You can see there it's on the palette. And I'm going to fill this little pastry bag, and we're going to pipe these stems into the painting. And you can see here I'm just putting the dark green paint on one side of the bag, and then I'm going to wrap it around the other side. And so I'm kind of coated the whole bag with the green, and I'm going to have white in the center, and it's going to allow me to have like this kind of variegated look, so it doesn't come out a solid green, and it kind of looks more natural. Could almost be like light reflecting on there. You can see it's in the bag now. It's really tight. Keep it twisted up there. I'm going to cut a small hole. Always cut smaller first, just to make sure it's, because you can't go back and make the cut smaller. And I'm going to practice this stem on my palette. Again, just like the beginning, practicing your petals on the palette. You just keep practicing, to make sure you get that flow right. So I'm going to take some of the Pyrrole Red, and these are going to be for the little flower dollops that are going to be in there. And I'm going to mix them with some of the white paint. So I've got my mid viscosity down there, and I'm going to squeeze the last of my texture out of here, and so I can get these red dollops in there. And it's okay, I have just a small amount of all the other colors on the base, but it keeps everything homogenized together. Take some of this last bit of yellow. I'm going to warm that red up a little bit with it too. So you can see it's going to look kind of orangey in the beginning. And then, how we were doing everything with a little bit of color on each knife. We'll take the direct red, the Pyrrole Red that's out of the mid viscosity, and put it on the knife when we do it, so it'll have like a multi-tone feel to it. And again, I'm just kind of trying to practice that flow and rolling that knife around there. You can see I'm trying to get the pile of paint to look just like the way I want it on the wood panel. And so I'm practicing that roll and practicing what it's going to look like before I actually go on to the wood panel. I'm trying to create these like flower buds, almost these big flower buds. And when I put them in there, I'm going to like slap them down almost like they're going to slide directly off the side with the rounded edge facing down. I'm just going to kind of figure out where they're going to go, and you just drop them down straight off, and like they're sliding off the knife with the rounded part down, so it feels like they're like little flower bulbs. Sometimes, I put things in there just to complete compositions, and a lot of times I'm looking at the painting and I'm like, is this really working? But trust me, it will all come together here in a few minutes here when we're done. But I'm just, I'm not going to overdo it. I'm going to put, 4 or 5. I'm just kind of looking for open spaces where it makes sense to put these flower bulbs into open spaces where I'll be able to drop a stem down, and it doesn't intrude on the composition of the stems coming down. And so with the pastry bag here that we loaded up, keep it really tight and twisted and in the palm of your hand, and practice kind of how you're going to make these stems on the palette, because it's all about keeping a consistent flow while you're squeezing. You can see here as I'm squeezing, I'm pulling down and it's not getting bubbles or separating. And make sure you practice that before you actually go on there, because when we put these on the flower, we want to get it down in one stroke. And you can see here I'm showing you how, like, if you don't have the right pressure, it'll come out kind of sputtery. A lot of times you got to get some of it out, and you can see here I'm kind of wiggling, and that's if you're going too slow. So it's like, really practice this, and then when you go in there, you're going to figure out exactly where they're going to go, and you're going to squeeze hard, and you're going to just get a nice stroke all the way down. And now you can see how that contrast works with the two different greens. You got to make sure that that green shows up over the light green. If you did both of them light green, they wouldn't show up. So I'm just like sticking them into the flowers and give it a nice pull, and pulling straight down and pressure on the bag as I'm coming down. So I get a nice even flow of paint out there. Always keep that bag really tight. And now I'm going to take the last of this. I'm going to kind of make like grass kind of shooting up through there. Practice kind of where they're going to go first. And this is really important, because if you mess it up while you're on there, you can kind of mess it up. So kind of really plan out exactly where you're going to have those wispy grasses going through there, keeping that solid pressure as you're pulling up on it. And then it kind of, the grass kind of just ties it all together and gives it a nice natural feel to it. I mean, you know, as natural as it's going to look, it's still an impression. But that's pretty much it, and that's how you make a sunflower painting. And I'm going to use the same pastry bag to sign as we go along there. But that's it. It's kind of cool how it all comes together with the red and the grass. It just kind of like, just the composition all comes together, and you can see here all the depth and dimension. This is a good introductory way to paint a sunflower. We can come in and do them a lot more detailed with fully textured backgrounds, but I designed this so you can have an easy win on this piece and achieve something that you're very happy with. And again, please leave your comments, and I can help you out with anything, and contact me if you had any questions.